listeners, to the Mindful Living podcast with your host Sana, where we dive deep into the things that shape our emotional and mental well being. I'm your host Sana, as always, and today we are talking about a topic that so many of us have faced at some point: betrayal and forgiveness. Now, how do we navigate the pain of betrayal? Can we ever truly forgive? And if we do, does that mean we have to rebuild trust? To help us understand this, I have an incredible guest today for all of you listeners, Dr. Bruce Chalmer. Now, let me share a bit about Dr. Chalmer with all of you. He has been working with couples for over 30 years, helping them through some of their most difficult challenges. He's the author of 3 books, including his latest, Betrayal and Forgiveness: How to Navigate the Turmoil and Learn to Trust Again. Also, he's the co host of the Couples Therapy in 7 Words podcast. And with that, Dr. Chama, welcome to the show. And it's an absolute charm and honor to have you with us today.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to be here. I think I was interviewed from India once before, and I can't remember exactly where it was or who it was on another podcast. But so I think this is my second virtual trip to India, and I'm delighted to to be visiting.
Beautiful, Dr. Bruce. So, um, of course, when we talk about these emotions and especially betrayal, it's one of those wounds that cut deep. It's something people carry, sometimes all throughout their life, all along. So, in your experience, what are some of the most common betrayals that happen in relationships?
Well, I work as a couples therapist, and so overwhelmingly, what I see is infidelity. There's a lot. I once guessed, I think it was close to half of the people that I meet in a first session are telling me there's been some kind of infidelity. So the most frequent kind of betrayal that I see is that. I also see quite a few people where the betrayal wasn't necessarily something like sexual infidelity, but it was maybe lying to them about finances or lying about them to other people or things like that. And that could be with, a spouse or a romantic partner, but that could also be with another family member or a friend or a business partner. And the book that you mentioned, I actually write about 12 different couples, many of whom are in fact either spouses or partners, but quite a few are also, I have some siblings, I have some friends, I have some business associates, things like that. The thing about betrayal is it's only betrayal if there is some expectation you have in a relationship that gets violated. Some random person on the street could be mean or cut us off in traffic or something like that. That's bad. It might even be dangerous, but it's not necessarily a betrayal. A betrayal is only when you have an expectation. And it shakes people to the core because they had, when it's a close person to you, like for example, a spouse, when you're betrayed, it makes you not only doubt who they are, it makes you doubt yourself.
That's a really interesting point. And also, it isn't just about. I think we can put this in any other context as well. It can come in so many forms. Maybe like financial deceit to maybe emotional neglect. So, Dr. Chama, what do you think makes betrayal so devastating to the person experiencing it? I mean, is it more about the act, but as you mentioned about the expectation, or is it the breaking of trust?
I think it's all of that. It's both of that. In other words, it's because you have expectations of someone often based on commitments people have made to each other. If it's a married couple, they've promised to be there for each other. And when somebody violates that in a big way, it shakes your whole world. And, in addition to just feeling so horrible that someone you thought you knew could do that to you, often people then are worried about what's gonna happen in their lives. Are they gonna lose their marriage? Are they gonna lose their family? Are gonna lose their livelihood? All of those things really make it, there's a period of shock that happens. There's grief involved. That's like when you lose a loved one to death. There's grief involved in betrayal as well.
Mm. Mm. Makes sense. And now talking about your book, Betrayal and Forgiveness. Let's also talk about the second part, which is forgiveness. So, people often struggle with what forgiveness really, really means. So, does forgiving someone always mean reconciliation, or it can happen even if the relationships don't continue?
Yeah, that's there basically there I mean, I'm sure I'm oversimplifying some, but there are 2 ways that people use the term forgiveness, and one way implies, well, if I forgive someone who hurt me, I guess I'm restoring the relationship. And the way I'm using the term is the other way, which is it doesn't imply that at all. You can forgive someone who you still intend to divorce, or you still intend to sue in court, or you still intend to, have prosecuted or whatever. You can forgive people because in the way I'm using the term, and of course, lots of people use it this way, forgiveness is an inside job. Forgiveness isn't even about the person you're forgiving. It's, lots of people like to quote the novelist Anne Lamott, who had a wonderful a little saying about forgiveness. I probably won't get the words exactly right. To not forgive is like drinking rat poison and waiting for the rat to die. And, I really think that's a great point. When you forgive, you get the poison out of you. Then you can think about the rat, so to speak. You can think about whoever hurt you. And
Mhm.
if you're going to rebuild a relationship with someone after a betrayal, that's gonna involve more than just the person doing the forgiving, of course. That's gonna involve both parties trying to figure out, can they trust each other again? So that's a much different I have a whole section in the book about that as well. That's a much different, task than getting to the point where you can forgive. Basically, when I talk about forgiveness, you're forgiven when you can think about whatever happened, and it's never gonna be a pleasant memory, but when you can think about it without sort of clicking into a trauma reaction. When you're not, panicking, you're not obsessed with it, you're not overwhelmed with anger, you can think about it and say, "Well, yeah, that happened, I wish it happened, but okay, let's move on and figure out what to do." That's how you know when you've forgiven.
Such an important distinction because I think a lot of us we assume that if we are forgiving, we have to let that person back into our lives. But it seems like we are saying forgiveness is more about personal healing than just restoring the relationship itself.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and I tend to think of it as it's sort of it's a first step, if you can get there, then you can think clearly about what you wanna do about the relationship. And so it takes work to be able to reach that place where you can think clearly about it without being overwhelmed by it. And so, yeah, forgiveness is very much it doesn't guarantee anything about the relationship, but it helps you then figure out what you wanna do about the relationship.
Right, right. Okay, now a little bit of personal question, Dr. Chalmers. So your journey is very, very inspiring. It's interesting, and uh, you have authored 3 books. You have your own podcast as well. So if you can share a bit about your own journey with all of our listeners.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, as you mentioned, I've been doing couples work for over 30 years, but I'm actually in my 70s. So I didn't start early. I didn't start right out of graduate school.
Mm.
I had degree in statistics. In fact, the first book I wrote isn't listed there. I actually wrote a statistics textbook back in 1986 because I really enjoyed, trying to clarify that for people. But I got my PhD in psychology, and then some years later, mostly as a result of experiencing crises in my own life and crises in my then marriage, I decided I wanted to get into clinical work, and I got clinical training, and so that's what led me into it. And the reason I ended up writing books, aside from the fact that it's a fun thing to do if you like to write, um, I realized how much I was learning from the clients I was working with. The couples that I would see, they would be facing these very difficult, all sorts if you can imagine it, I've probably seen something like it, all sorts of difficult issues that people are dealing with. And it was very inspiring to see how people found resilience, found ways of dealing with it, even if it didn't work out well, if they didn't stay together or if they didn't feel super better afterward. Just the fact that they were willing to struggle. When people come to a therapist, they're already in that place of feeling like, I want to work on this, even though I don't know how. And I find that very inspiring that people could do that.
Mm. Wow, what an interesting transformative journey, Dr. Bruce. And thank you for sharing that. And now moving on, we mentioned about trust rebuilding, and I think one of the most difficult aspects of betrayal is rebuilding that trust which is lost, because it's such a delicate, it's a thin line. So and some people say that once trust is broken, it can never ever be fully repaired.
Mm.
But then there are people out there who believe that can actually become stronger after betrayal. So what's your take on this?
Yeah, I like the way you said that. The second part, it's I have seen that happen. Trust can be stronger after betrayal when it works. Couples that stay together and rebuild trust after a betrayal, the only way they really do that is by their relationship getting better than it was before. And I'll often note this. I've never had anybody say in my office to their partner, "Hey, thanks for cheating." I've never heard that one. But I have heard lots of people in various ways say, "Hey, you know what? We needed some kind of crisis. We didn't realize it, but some kind of crisis had to happen and you precipitated it. So thanks for doing that because look how much better off we are now." And to do that, the reason I think that people can end up being grateful for it is that the only way you build trust is by developing a level of understanding of yourself and the other person that is all about intimacy. It's all about a very deep intimacy, and for people to be able to do that
Mhm.
is, as I say, it makes the relationship much better off than it was before.
Mm, mhm. Makes sense. Makes sense. And what about those, Dr. Bruce, who say that, okay, there's a saying that fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me.
Mhm.
Because people feel that giving another chance, it may just open the door to more hurt. I
Yeah.
mean, what do you say to those who believe that trust once broken, it should never be given again because it's
Yeah.
another sign of weakness?
Yeah, and, that is a way of avoiding risk, and I say that with respect. There are people who would say, "Yeah, I can't risk that again. I can't give my heart or let my heart stay with someone who has hurt me that way, even if I can come to understand it and forgive it and recognize, whatever the context was." And I respect that. I've met people who feel that way. I think it's interesting because one of the things I think we all learn by going through betrayal, if you thought there was such a thing as perfect safety in this world, it turns out that's an illusion. And I'm not cynical, I'm not saying, "Oh, everybody betrays everybody." No, everybody doesn't betray everybody. But we're all subject to being hurt sometimes. And even good people sometimes mess up badly and hurt people that they love. And, the situation is what it is. I'm not trying to, let people off the hook for doing things that are flat out immoral. But context, to understand the context turns out to be really important. And so people who feel like, oh, if anybody ever betrays someone, you can never trust them again. I mean, that is you can take that stance, but I think you're depriving yourself of, for people who do that are depriving themselves of an opportunity to learn much more deeply about how they work and how life works and how relationships work. And that's what I'm saying. So many couples, I've worked with so many people who have come in and said in one of the first sessions, they will often say, that let's say the person who was cheated on, the spouse who didn't do the cheating, will say, "If you had asked me 6 months ago if I would stay with my partner if they cheated on me, I would have said never. And yet here I am." And many of those people go on to be grateful that they did. So it very much challenges that idea that says, "Oh, yeah, people are either trustworthy or not, and that's that." But in real life, no, we're all most of us are quite trustworthy, but nobody's 100%.
Yeah,
Circumstances arise, and people sometimes do things that they never would have thought they'd do.
yeah, true, true. Fair enough. And also, uh, in this particular, situation, um, of betrayal, or how we navigate through uh, this journey, I think the role of self forgiveness it also plays a very important role after,
Oh, yeah.
because some people, uh, we tend to blame ourselves for being betrayed, saying that I did not see it coming. I should have seen the signs, or I should have been in the better relationship. I should have made a better decision.
Mhm.
So, how do we navigate that self blame and move toward self forgiveness? Because that, can really, really eat us up emotionally.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. In fact, I talk in the book about 3 steps to forgiveness, realizing anytime you have some author who talks about 3 steps, take it with a grain of salt because it's not that neat. It's not like you do step one, step two, step three. But the first of my 3 steps that I talk about is indeed forgive yourself. And for all the reasons you described, it is a very natural phenomenon. In fact, it's an evolutionary phenomenon. It makes sense in evolutionary terms that we would tend to blame ourselves, even as young children. Young children will blame themselves for things that, from an adult standpoint, couldn't possibly be their fault. Children who are sexually abused, as adults, will be blaming themselves and say, "I should have stopped that, even though it happened when I was 3 or something." That obviously that doesn't make any logical sense, but it makes emotional sense to blame ourselves because that gives us a sense that we have some control. It's like, wow, if I didn't believe that I could have stopped it, then what kind of world am I living in? So self-blame is kind of a pretty much universal phenomenon when somebody gets hurt that way. And the way you get past self-blame is to recognize, and this is not something you can just snap your fingers and do, but to recognize essentially you were doing the best you could. With hindsight, you can see, oh, I should have seen that coming. I was ignoring all the red flags, whatever. But that's hindsight. You only know what you know when you know it. And you might have had really strong reasons to not see the red flags because it would feel so dangerous to see them. If your whole life depends on your life as constructed depends on staying with somebody, to see the signs that maybe you shouldn't trust them is a really dangerous thought. So people will often tend to shy away from it. And then, something happens and they blame themselves later. So when you can really get to that point of saying, you know what? Knowing what I know and not knowing what I didn't know, I was doing the best I could. If I'd known differently, I would have acted differently, but I didn't know differently. That's what self-forgiveness feels like. And and I claim, and this is probably one of my shakier claims, I would say, but I claim that to get from step 2 is forgiving whoever hurt you. I claim that's a pretty short step because on some level, the person who hurt you was doing the best they could too. Even though you could say, well, how can you say they're doing the best they could when they did something terribly wrong? Yeah, they were doing things that were wrong, but given who they were, given what forces were acting within them, that's what they came up with. You could wish it wasn't so, but on some level, to forgive them is I won't bother being angry anymore. They were doing what they could do. I have a person that I refer to in the book that I've often mentioned, who was somebody I met. I never met her ex-husband because he was in prison at the time I worked with this particular woman. He was in prison because he'd been this horribly violent, horrible person to her and to their children. And she finally was able to get out of it at some risk to her life, but she was finally able to get out of it. And she said she had totally forgiven him. And that didn't mean at all that she trusted him. She
Mhm,
forgave him in the sense that she figured, you know what, he's crazy. He's whatever's going on with him,
mhm,
you can't trust him. So, but she didn't have to be angry at him anymore. She just had to be careful. She never wanted
mhm,
to be around him, but she wasn't angry anymore. So, to forgive whoever hurt you, if you've forgiven yourself, that becomes possible. If you haven't forgiven yourself, it's really difficult. And then I have a third step, which I give a funny name to, and you don't have to be religious in a Western sense to appreciate this name. I call it forgiving God. And what do I mean by forgiving God? What I mean is forgiving the fact that the world is such that we can get hurt that way. In other words, accepting that reality, even when it's painful and hard to understand, is still on some level right to be what it is. That's what I mean by forgiving God. Another word for that is faith. Again, it doesn't have to be religious faith. Just that mindset that says this whole existence business is somehow right to be what it is. And what we can do is work with it instead of insisting that it not be what it is. And the people who manifest that faith are the ones who are able to get to that level of forgiveness. And they're the couples that can actually often rebuild trust because they're able to face the really hard stuff without freaking out about it.
Mhm. That's powerful. And that's fascinating. But uh, I think if we look at this from a contradictory perspective, let's, let's talk about unconditional forgiveness. I mean, sometimes it may enable harmful behavior. So if someone keeps betraying us and we keep forgiving them,
Mhm.
aren't we just teaching them that there are no consequences? You can keep on doing harm to me, and I'll keep on forgiving you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and of course, it's I mean, people can choose to do that and often do for various reasons. That's often about not feeling like you're entitled to decent treatment,
Mhm.
and that is not a basis for a relationship that people are gonna wanna be in. And, the notion of unconditional forgiveness or even the notion of unconditional love, which is a lovely concept, sort of the love that parents have for children, ideally. It's it's a nice concept, but I wouldn't wanna romanticize it too much, I feel like I love my wife and she loves me, and I don't want her to love me unconditionally because I don't want her to love me if I ever, God forbid, turned horrible to her. I would want her to get rid of me, you know? So, that concept of unconditionally forgiving someone no matter what they do to you, I mean, tends not to be a recipe for a very good relationship. As you say, it's certainly and in terms, it's interesting because you were saying, yeah, it teaches the person who's hurting you that they can just get away with it. Well, of course that's true, but moreover, it just reinforces for the person who gets hurt that they're somehow supposed to get hurt, that they deserve getting hurt, and yeah, that's a problem with self-love, maybe self-forgiveness too.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I agree. Great, great. So, of course, if our listeners would like to get a hold of your book, Betrayal and Forgiveness, and also your podcast, how they can do that, Dr. Bruce?
Well, to get the book, it's available pretty much anywhere books are sold, at least, I mean, Amazon has it all over the world, and, there's some other places where it's available. So if you search for, Betrayal and Forgiveness and throw my name in there, Dr. Bruce Chalmer, it'll come up. You can also, get more information about me and my practice and also our podcast by going to my website, which is simply brucechalmer.com, BruceChalmer, brucechalmer.com. We also have a podcast website. The name of the podcast is Couples Therapy in 7 Words. So people can find that at our podcast website, which is CT in 7. That's the number 7, CT in 7, CT for couples therapy.com. And then you'll see information about the podcast. I do that together with my wife, Judy Alexander. And yeah, I hope people will tune into that. We have a lot of fun doing it. We interview really lots of wonderful guests, as indeed you do.
Beautiful, beautiful. I encourage all of our listeners to check out the show notes to get a hold of Dr. Bruce's book and also listen to this podcast. We'll have all of the links in the show notes. And Dr. Chama, thank you so much for this enlightening conversation. And what I believe, what I learned from here is that betrayal and forgiveness are things we all encounter in some or the other way, almost maybe every day or maybe frequently. And your insights, they really give us a practical roadmap for how to process and also heal ourselves and others. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. It's been an honor to be on, and yeah, thank you for all of your wisdom.
For everyone listening, thank you so much for tuning into the Mindful Living. And if this episode has connected with you, if you have learned some important takeaways from this episode, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And as always, take care of your mind, take care of your heart, and keep living mindfully along with us. Until next time, this is your host, Sana, signing off. Thank you.